But in 1846, he published an essay under the name Søren Kierkegaard called The Present Age, where he described his time. Imagine, this was 1846. He said, we live in a time dominated by the media and the public.
That sounds frighteningly relevant.
Isn't that? That's really amazing when you think about social media today and the importance of media today. And he said, what you have to do is resist what the media tells you. He was talking about journals and newspapers at that time. He said, you have to resist that and think for yourself about what's really going on. The media has created a monster, he says, called the public, which media wants you to believe is real. But who is the public really, he asks in 1846. Is there a real public there, or is it a mystification created by the media? In his view, it's a mystification. So what's happening in his view is already mass media, to a certain extent, in the mid-1840s, is creating a larger and larger sense of a public sphere, a public domain, to which people should conform and into which people should fit.
And what about that did Kierkegaard find off-putting, or?
He felt it took away your own subjective truth. It took away the recognition of your own responsibility, your own struggles. He called it the earthquakes of existence. He said if you follow what the media tells you and what the public allegedly tells you, you won't register all the different earthquakes. He uses that phrase, the tremors, the trembling of your everyday life, all the shifts in mood and thought and experience that we actually go through. His suggestion there is that what you'll actually do is pave over the difficulties of everyday life and impose a smoothness that is delusional, misleading, conformist, distracting.
Right, so it's the last part there that I guess has the normatively negative judgment, because the first part sounds okay for a lot of people, right? You know, life is hard. I want to smooth things over. Why shouldn't I go with the flow?
Right.
Why shouldn't I subscribe to, Instagram?
Why do I have to think about things so deeply?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, the Kardashians have a great Instagram feed. Why can't I just look at that 24/7? Yeah. So, but there's an argument here, and is it a moral argument, or is it a phenomenological argument that Kierkegaard's making about the flimsiness or the superficiality of that?
I would say it's not only phenomenological. He's describing what's going on in his world and talking about ways of resisting what's going on, this tendency towards massification. It's also normative, because he clearly values the importance of the individual experiences as against stories from elsewhere. But it's also political, because he sees this conformism occurring in Denmark exactly between the Danish state and the Danish church, enforcing implicitly, but also through various organs like their journals and newspapers, enforcing a kind of conformity that's taking away every person's individuality and individual experience. And this is already 1846.
Is it a presaging of totalitarianism in that sense? I mean, that's an anachronistic reading, I suppose, but is some of the anxiety that Kierkegaard's expressing, anxiety that comes along with seeing the beginning of a state formation that was sort of unprecedented to that point where the state has so much power because of the printing press, because of its alignment with other normative systems in society like the church, that I guess simply had not yet quite been, it was still fairly unprecedented in European society. That was the moment in history, I suppose, where it was all congealing, right?
He didn't use the phrase totalitarianism, and he didn't criticize notions of totality, but I do believe this is the track he's on. He's criticizing the overwhelming conformism in state formations, media formations, church formations that seem to be congealing around this time.
Right.
The interesting thing about it is, at that time in the 1840s, it was a convergence around the thought of modernity, the thought of the priority of science, of technology, of business, of organization, of calculability, of regulation. So Kierkegaard, I'm going to put him forward as one of the great precursors of what I would call modernism, which thrives on resisting modernity by saying that underneath modernity, something else is going on that you need to be aware of. And the great, he doesn't write about this, but the great symbol of modernity in the mid-19th century is a building in London called the Crystal Palace that was put up in 1850 by Queen Victoria and some of her architects. And this was meant to celebrate British technology and science. It was sort of the perfect utopian building meant to show how far British science and technology had gotten and how successful they were at bringing everyone together. Kierkegaard didn't comment on this, but he has a sense of that kind of vision that he's resisting. It's really Dostoevsky in 1864, 9 years after Kierkegaard died, in the Notes from Underground, in his character the Underground Man, who attacks the Crystal Palace and says, you think this is so great, you think this is so positive, everything seems so wonderful there, but look at what you're actually doing. You're taking away, Dostoevsky in the voice of the Underground Man says, you're taking away freedom. You're taking away the power of the human will to do something even contrary if it wants to. You're imposing a conformist kind of thinking around the values of business, science, and technology that is reducing human freedom.
So is what Kierkegaard and then to a greater degree Dostoevsky, what they're resisting, is it the emergence of the intertwining of these various facets of modern life into what was becoming the new sort of socio-political unit that was migrating away from, let's say, church and empire into something more like nation and state?
Yes, that's a great way of describing it. And this comes out perhaps even more vividly in Nietzsche's response to the establishment of the Second Empire in Germany under Bismarck. Nietzsche is very critical of this moment, whereas many people in Germany at the time, under Bismarck, the Second Empire, were very happy, were very celebratory. They felt, this is great, we're a modern state, now we're a modern empire, now we can compete with the British and the French and the Russians. This is a wonderful moment for us. Nietzsche attacked this violently, following the lines, the suggestions that Dostoevsky and Kierkegaard had set out, criticizing the conformism and the uniformity, the calculability that was arising from these modern notions of nation and state, still enshrined in the empire at this time,
right.
But the seeds of the modern nation or the modern state were already appearing at that time. And it really wasn't, so just to finish the point, there was a critic, Georg Brandes, who in 1888 said, after he'd read some Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, and Kierkegaard, said, you know what, these three writers are all moving in similar directions. They all need to be seen as criticizing the modern world and what's happening in the modern world. And Brandes, I think, was very far-sighted in seeing these links. He called them elitists. He called them all aristocratic thinkers. And there's considerable room for seeing that in the three of them. But his main point... Is it
because they had the comfort and education to take time to articulate a distance and a hesitation with respect to what the populist masses were mindlessly reveling in?
It wasn't primarily that for Brandes. It was the argument that Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky, and Nietzsche all seem to share, namely, only a few people can see things the way we're seeing it.
Oh, I see. So it was the way they were presenting their...
It's an appeal to a very select group of critics, cultural critics, that they're hoping their works will actually create, right, to go against the massification of geopolitical life at the time. So that's their sense of elitism, right, that we will have special followers,
right,
who will understand what we're getting at and will understand our critique.
And if I remember right, you were saying before that this movement is often referred to as modernism.
Right.
But confusingly, at least for me, modernism in that sense is actually a form of rejection or resistance to modernization.
Modernism, so that's a very nice point. Thank you for pointing that out. Modernity begins, as we were saying, in the 16th century, 17th century, with the thoughts of Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, and so forth. This development of the thought of reason, of rational organization, geometry, and so forth. So this moves in the direction of what I'm calling modernity. And this is what Hegel encompasses in his work, this kind of total picture of what modernity could include. Modernism is the beginning. It begins, I would say, already in the works of Baudelaire, Edgar Allan Poe, certainly in Kierkegaard, certainly Dostoevsky, certainly Nietzsche. Modernism involves the claim that underneath modernity, something else is going on that is not primarily rational, that comes from another set of drives that are not rationally governable. In Kierkegaard, it's faith. In Dostoevsky, it's freedom, human will. In Nietzsche, it's the will to power. And with these emphases, they develop a critique of modernity that comes to be called modernism, and that lasts roughly until I'm going to say, the 1945 and the end of the Second World War, the beginning of the post-war period, I think.
So can you think of it as sort of a romanticism, or is it more subtle and less rosy colored than that?
It's romanticism in the sense that there's a belief in a deeper set of drives that's being covered up by reason and the emphasis on reason, business, science, and technology. It's romantic in that sense, in the view of depth. But it's not romantic in the sense of utopian.
Right.
I mean, it is romantic in the sense of utopian for Karl Marx, who also moves in this direction. So Marx, in rejecting reason, business, science, and technology, says that's a bourgeois approach. That's linked to a certain class. In fact, what's going on is something involving money, something involving power, class struggle, a political economy, politically economic struggle between competing classes. That's what's really going on underneath this veneer of reason, science, and technology. Nietzsche emphasizes the will to power is what's really going on. And Freud, who should be seen with Marx and Nietzsche together, I think, emphasizes the competing drives of sex and death, pleasure and aggression, showing that underneath the veneer of polite civilization, as he called it, there are many discontents that are actually unsettling this apparently harmonious progress some thought we were making. So there is a large group of critics of modernity, I would say, both that fit within the description of existentialism, but go beyond that too, that can be seen as modernist, right? So representatives of modernism pointing out the real struggles involved in modern life rather than celebrating it.